The silence in the Hartford law office was a crushing weight. Alexander Mitchell sat motionless as the lawyer's words echoed off the mahogany paneled walls. $26,400,000 to him. To him alone. The explosion was immediate and exactly as he'd predicted. His father, Robert, slammed his fist on the conference table with a sound like breaking bones. His mother, Patricia, her voice cracking like ice, demanded answers she would never accept. His brother, Michael, the corporate shark who believed he understood everything about power, was already tapping furiously on his phone, calculating appeals. And his sister, Sarah, just stared, her eyes accusing him of a murder he didn't commit. But Alex possessed a secret his family never grasped. A lesson from his grandparents' patience wasn't just waiting, it was preparation. It was seeing the storm on the horizon and building a shelter long before the first raindrop fell. Margaret Davis, the family attorney, continued reading through their rage, her voice a steady anchor in the storm. The will was ironclad. William and Eleanor Mitchell had been methodical, thorough, and brutally clear. Every legal loophole was sealed, every potential challenge preemptively countered. The room grew colder as the reality sank in. This wasn't a mistake or a moment of elderly confusion. This was deliberate. Robert shot up so fast his leather chair toppled backward. His face was a mask of purple rage, a toxic mix of betrayal and desperation. He pointed a trembling finger at Alex. "You manipulated them. You played the victim, used your lifestyle to guilt them into this insanity." The words hung in the air like poison. Alex felt a familiar crack in his chest, not from surprise, but from the cold confirmation of what he'd always been to them. His identity wasn't just different, it was a weapon they believed he used for manipulation or pity. Patricia's tears weren't for her lost parents, they were for lost money. "He was on heart medication," she insisted, her voice trembling with hysteria. "Eleanor was confused!" No sane grandparents would cut out their family for one. Michael, ever the strategist, was already on the phone with his own lawyers, treating his grandparents' final wishes like a hostile takeover. Finally, Alex spoke. His voice was calm, steady, rehearsed in his mind countless times with the grandparents who saw this day coming from years away. "I won't stop you from contesting the will," he said, his words cutting through the chaos. "But I want you to understand why they did this. Grandma and Grandpa didn't leave me this money because they pitied me. They left it to me because they saw something in this family that you refused to acknowledge." The only sound was the rain lashing against the windows. "They saw that love isn't supposed to have conditions," Alex continued. "That family isn't something you earn by pretending to be someone you're not. And they saw which one of us understood that. Robert's ultimatum was swift and sharp as a blade. Agree to split the inheritance, or he was no longer part of the family. His belongings would be on the porch within the hour." Alex stood slowly, straightening his suit jacket. He looked at the faces around the table, once the center of his world, now twisted into unrecognizable masks of greed. He walked to the door, his hand resting on the brass handle. "I know," he said simply, and stepped out into the storm. The drive to Martha's Vineyard was a blur of rain and reflection. His phone buzzed relentlessly with furious texts, but he'd silenced it hours ago. As the ferry cut through the choppy sound, the clouds began to break, sunlight spilling through like a promise. The estate stood just as he remembered. White clapboard siding weathered by salty air, blue shutters his grandfather painted every 3 years. This wasn't a vacation house anymore. It was a sanctuary. On the nightstand in the master bedroom, an envelope with his name in Eleanor's elegant script waited for him. Inside, a small brass key and a note that made his hands tremble. "My dearest Alex, if you're reading this, the storm has begun. This key opens the safe in your grandfather's workshop. Everything you need is there. Remember what we taught you, patience is power, but preparation is wisdom. All our love, Grandma Eleanor." The workshop smelled of wood shavings and varnish. Behind a false panel in the workbench, he found the safe. The key turned smoothly. What he found inside rewrote his entire family history. The first item was a leather-bound diary, its pages filled with his grandfather William's youthful script, dated from 1962. One entry stopped Alex's breath. "James makes me feel like the person I was meant to be. I know what the world thinks of men like us, but when I'm with him, none of it matters." Alex sank into his grandfather's chair. Page after page revealed a love story hidden for 60 years. William had been gay, deeply in love with a man named James Morrison. He had faced the same fears, the same impossible choice between authenticity and acceptance that Alex knew so intimately. But Eleanor wasn't a betrayal of his truth. She was his greatest ally. She had known about James. She had protected their love, offering William a lavender marriage, a partnership of protection and deep friendship that shielded them both from a world not yet ready for their truths. The final diary entry, dated just months before his death, shattered Alex completely. "Alex reminds me so much of who I was, brave enough to live his truth, strong enough to face rejection. Eleanor and I have decided he should inherit everything, not out of pity, but because he's the only one who truly understands what we've been trying to teach for 60 years. Love wins, but only when you're patient enough to let it." This wasn't charity. It was the passing of a torch. By midnight, Alex had activated the network his grandparents had built with military precision. Private security would arrive at dawn. Margaret Chen was ready for the legal battle. A retired judge, Harry Thornton, had already reviewed the will and declared it unassailable. His family was coming with lawyers, threats, and a media circus. They would paint him as a manipulative predator. They would use his sexuality as their primary weapon. But they didn't know the truth. His grandparents hadn't just left him an inheritance. They had left him an army, a legacy, and the unshakable proof that true love isn't about acceptance. It's about protection. The storm his family was about to unleash had been foreseen by two people who had survived far worse. And Alex was no longer facing it alone. The attack came a week later, coordinated and vicious. Michael launched the first strike online, a carefully crafted Facebook post painting Alex as a predator who had preyed on his vulnerable grandparents. It featured photos of Alex at pride parades and twisted his relationship with his partner, Daniel, into evidence of undue influence. The hashtag #FactJusticeForMitchell was trending by noon. Next, his parents gave a tearful interview on local news, speaking of their lifestyle choices. With coach concern while questioning their parents' mental state, they never mentioned the years Alex was excluded from family dinners or the Christmases his partner wasn't welcome. But as the attacks mounted, so did Alex's defenses. Margaret Chen called with a bombshell. "We found something," she said. "Your grandparents hired a forensic accountant. Michael has been stealing from them for over 2 years. The evidence was damning. 400,000 siphoned away through falsified invoices. Emails proved his father, Robert, had helped cover it up. Then came the final, devastating blow to their case. His sister, Sarah, met him in secret, her face etched with guilt. She slid a flash drive across the table. "I can't be a part of this anymore," she whispered. For weeks, she had been secretly recording their family's strategy sessions. The recordings were chilling. Robert discussing how to use Alex's sexuality against him in court. Patricia planning which friends to manipulate into testifying. Michael outlining his plan to bankrupt Alex with legal fees. They had unleashed a storm, but they were about to face a war. And Sarah had just handed Alex all the ammunition he would ever need. The Boston courthouse was a media circus, but the narrative was already shifting. Counter-protesters, organized by Yale's LGBT Alumni Association and veterans groups honoring William's service, vastly outnumbered the family's paid supporters. Inside, the family's case crumbled. Margaret Chen opened with video testimony from Michael Santos, James Morrison's surviving partner, an eloquent 78-year old man who spoke of William and Eleanor's quiet, lifelong activism supporting the LGBT community. Then, Sarah took the stand. The recordings played, filling the courtroom with the cold, calculating voices of her family as they plotted to destroy Alex. When the recording of Michael admitting he didn't care about his grandparents' wishes, only his, deserved, money played, a gasp rippled through the room. The final nail in the coffin was the forensic accountant's report. Confronted with evidence of his embezzlement, Michael broke down on the stand, confessing to a gambling addiction that had consumed the stolen money. Judge Thornton's ruling was swift and absolute. The will was upheld. The family's challenge was dismissed with prejudice, and Michael was ordered to appear for arraignment on federal embezzlement charges. The backlash was brutal. Robert's firm lost major contracts. Patricia's hospital suspended her. Michael was disbarred. They became social pariahs, rejected by the very community they had tried to manipulate. The victory felt hollow, a painful amputation of a family he once loved. But as autumn settled over Martha's vineyard, Alex began to build. 5 years later, the estate had been transformed into the Second Chances Sanctuary, a safe haven for LGBT youth rejected by their families. On the wraparound porch where he had learned about patience, Alex watched a new generation find the unconditional love he had been gifted. He and Daniel were married on the estate grounds, surrounded by a chosen family of sanctuary residents, activists, and allies. Sarah, the only biological family member present, gave a short, powerful speech about learning too late that love should be offered freely, not used as a weapon. Late that night, Alex found one last letter tucked inside his grandfather's diary. "My dearest Alex, if you're reading this, you've survived the storm. You were never the problem in our family, you were the solution. Your courage gave us permission to remember who we always were. This inheritance was never about money. It was about the knowledge that love multiplies when it's shared. Build something beautiful." 10 years later, as director of the Mitchell Foundation, Alex stood in that same study, the walls covered not with stock certificates, but with graduation photos and wedding announcements from the countless lives the foundation had touched. The inheritance his grandparents left him had multiplied beyond measure, not in dollars, but in futures reclaimed and communities strengthened. They had given him proof that patience isn't passive waiting. It is the active, deliberate, and loving preparation for the moment love finally gets its chance to win.